Here is your WESN News on the Hour. I'm Naomi McNish. Thanks for joining us. Here are the headlines. 12 gang-related detention orders issued. Health Minister rejects UNC's claims on Port of Spain General Hospital Central Block completion. Elderly woman found dead in Malabar home. And internationally, White House pulls CDC nominee hours before Senate hearing. Now for the details. 12 individuals, including a woman, have been detained under the ongoing state of emergency due to national security concerns. The detainees linked to organized criminal groups are accused of gang-related violence, drug and firearm trafficking, and retaliatory attacks. The orders signed between March 3rd and 7th were gazetted on March 11th. Among those named are alleged gang leaders and enforcers from groups such as the Muslim Organized Criminal Group, Rasta City, and the Mobile gang. So far, 43 detention orders have been issued under the SOE. Health Minister Terence Dayal Singh has dismissed UNC claims that the new central block at Port of Spain General Hospital is only 15% complete. Speaking on March 12th, Dayal Singh clarified that construction is 100% finished, while the overall project is 85 to 88% complete as it awaits outfitting. The $1.3 billion block, expected to house 540 beds, is set to welcome its first patients by July. Dayal Singh also revealed plans for a major renovation and expansion of the hospital's accident and emergency department in 2026. Police are investigating the death of a woman found in a decomposed state at her home in Malabar. Officers responded to reports of a foul stench at Patrick Pamphile Avenue around 3:30 p.m. on Wednesday. Upon forcing entry, they discovered the body of 70-year-old Judith Harris in her bedroom, positioned with bricks and furniture placed over parts of her body. A district medical officer has ordered an autopsy, while homicide detectives continue their investigations. The White House has withdrawn Dave Weldon's nomination as CDC director just hours before his scheduled Senate hearing. The decision was made after it became clear he lacked the necessary votes for confirmation. Weldon, a former congressman and doctor, had previously spread misinformation about vaccines, including debunked claims linking them to autism. This marks the first time a CDC director required Senate approval under a 2022 law. The Biden administration has not yet announced a replacement. Well, that's news to the hour on WESN. I'm Naomi McNish. Thanks for watching.
WESN.
It's interesting how immigration is potentially turning into like the issue for many countries in the 2020s. And to some extent, it's not to say it wasn't an issue before, but we're seeing things go to the extremes. And ironically, the internal politics affects the amount of illegal immigration and immigration in a country, usually causing wide swings, the pendulum going to the extremes. Either the border is open or the border is completely closed. There's no amount of, moderation in the situation. Now, we in the Caribbean, it was one of those open secrets that we didn't necessarily talk about to the rest of the world. Yeah, we like to come and settle down in your place, sometimes illegally. Some people view it as a necessity, something that we didn't necessarily condone, but also didn't necessarily denounce. And now we have the situation going on in the UK. So we do have what the High Commissioner said, and as at least one or two of my callers said yesterday, the situation is most likely about trainees taking advantage. Not necessarily about the influx of asylum seekers due to crime. Now, Minister Hines weighed on the situation. He has pointed the fact that criminals were one group of people taking advantage of the migration policies and asylum laws, etc., etc. Something which I don't necessarily think we have evidence to say 100% this is the truth, but it's something that to some extent is potentially reasonable, because here's the thing. They are criminals with families. And we know some of them leave the country, still run their operations, but we know that there's reprisal killings and gang leaders technically have been killed in the past. They may be fleeing with their families and, ironically, saying asylum because of crime. It's a hell of a thing where part of the cause of the crime is fleeing because of the very thing that they caused. But it is what it is. How true is this statement from Minister Hines? We don't necessarily know. Ironically, he is saying that they're avoiding the law, they're fleeing accountability. I'm saying, I think they're fleeing each other. So, who is correct in this situation? It is either reason pertinent. Meanwhile, of course, other political leaders, politicians have weighed in the situation. This has caused a tit for tat between the Minister of National Security and the political leader of the NTA, Gary Griffith. And at this point, I think, when we get down to it, both of them have enough experience that one could speak to some extent how our government has engaged with the United Kingdom. Currently, one could speak to some extent how the then government, the partnership, engaged with the UK then, in the past. And Guy Griffith is claiming, we did everything we could to stop this, why didn't you stop this? Well, unfortunately, one of the things with Mr. Griffith's arguments is he's assuming that the situation was still within the realm by which our government was able to exercise enough control to prevent the UK deciding we have to have visas. So, at this point, we could talk about this topic a lot, right? What's the cause, who's to blame, whatever, whatever. But to some extent, it's academic. And the only thing I think we could agree on is that the British High Commissioner probably did not give us the full story, and without that, we really don't know how to fix it. Now, maybe they have given the government the full story. The government may or may not have revealed it to us. We, these people, don't necessarily know for sure. That's the environment that we live in. Lack of transparency, it is what it is. If you want us to believe you and in good faith, give you the benefit of the doubt, more transparency helps with that, because the results, they kind of leave us disappointed. So, but there's one thing though, I'm not going to fault necessarily government on this situation, because we don't know. We don't know, right? As much as we could say that they're not telling us, that's separate to, okay, but are we going to speculate enough to just put the blame on them? In this situation, I don't think we have enough to do so in a reasonable way, so I would prefer to leave it alone. But one thing that I can speak about very directly, Minister Hines referred to Gary Griffith as garrulous G-string in a Facebook post. Now, I don't know if Minister Hines, it's a Facebook post. I don't believe it's a video, so it's probably text. I don't know if he wrote it out himself, but it's, I believe, on a social media account that represents him. This is not the first time that this name, nickname, term of endearment, dare I say, has been used, I believe, by Minister Hines for Gary Griffith. It's not about if you like Gary or not. Take that out of the equation. This kind of language I just rather not see. It doesn't help the situation at all. It cements the people that don't like you, the use of the language, into not liking you further. And maybe Minister Hines has reached a point where He doesn't necessarily expect to be in government for too much longer. We don't know if he's going to outright retire, continue on as a senator, or in some other capacity to be a senator so that he could continue on as a minister, or not. But at the end of the day, this type of language, it really is just unprofessional. What is the benefit of using this language? Again, I don't know if Minister Hines typed it out or if a staffer typed it out, but this type of bubble nonsense, basically, you're telling me that a school child is running the country, or someone with the tact of a child, of a teenager, of a young man, of a foolish young man with a hot head, that because you are not necessarily prepared enough to debate your position and push back against his position based on reason and logic, you have to use insults. Now, don't get me wrong, other politicians do it too. This is just an example of the environment. Gary has at times used language similar to this. And when he does that, I'll call him out all the same. But I haven't, I mean, maybe I just didn't see it. But I didn't see Gary have a similar statement. Yes, he may have had directed attacks on Hines's capacity and proficiency, but he did say most incompetent minister ever and also a blatant liar. That's not the same thing as garrulous. I'm not going to repeat the rest. Now, meanwhile, it's actually kind of funny that you have the minister claiming, well, criminals are fleeing the law. I'm saying criminals are fleeing themselves, to be honest. You have Gary saying, well, crime just got out of control. And Kamala is also saying, crime just got out of control, and too many of the citizens are fleeing crime. All right. Then you have the UK saying, well, there are just too many people taking advantage of asylum laws to migrate. Although, according to one social media post, the figure is actually quite small, which is what makes me think there's something else triggered this whole situation, particularly because of how sudden it was. Unless the UK is basically saying, we don't really care about you no more. I don't think that's last part is the case. I'm just saying that possibility. But Jason Jones, an LGBTQ activist who I believe lives in the UK, or at least, or he did, he believes that this situation, it could gravely affect people who are seeking refuge from persecution. Now, that in and of itself, I mean, I understand people might want to leave the country because they don't necessarily like the environment here. Our stance as a society on LGBTQ people is a very strange and, dare I say, hypocritical one, because on one hand, I do find it interesting how open LGBTQ people could be in public, and yet how hated they could still be publicly. So far, we're kind of lucky that we don't see more hate crimes, I guess. It's almost like if the all-talk phenomenon of Trinbagonians extends to, for lack of a better way to put it, bigotry. We'll just talk, but we won't actually do anything. And for the most part, it seems as though most of the society is generally accepting. But still, there might be some people who decide they need to leave. To what extent they're fleeing persecution, I don't know. But he said something interesting. He's saying, now we're being scapegoated for this visa requirement. And I've reached the point, oh, they're saying, oh, well, the gays are running up there to claim asylum, which is absolute rubbish. Well, technically, if they're fleeing persecution, then that's, technically, they would be running up there to seek asylum. So just maybe utilize a consistent message, maybe. But here's the thing. I'm not too sure who's saying this. This was not on my radar. Maybe it's because I'm not bigoted, so I don't think about it in those terms. But I just find it interesting that because we don't really know the reason, or we can't be confident that this is the reason, or that is the reason, or these are the range of reasons that are the cause of the UK making this decision, essentially everybody, and this is a very human phenomenon, they think it's them, or they think it's whoever they hate the most, and that's pertinent to the situation, whether it's the minister, whether it's the criminals, I mean, I guess maybe I fall for that. I don't know. Whether it's gays, but we just don't know. Which is why to my initial point, I don't think it's useful to speculate on this. I'll be interested to know if anybody really thought about LGBTQ people seeking asylum or not, or migrating or not, if they had anything to do with this. I don't think so, but the fact is, Mr. Jones is basically, with a lack of information, he is sensitive to any, it could be anecdotal, it could be limited to very few singular instances. But since we don't know, we are speculating, and unfortunately, our fears are getting thrown out there. The politicians is more on bacchanal. Just saying. Meanwhile, just a brief thing about immigration. This whole situation with OFAC and the United States not renewing or discontinuing licenses to allow for the energy sector in Venezuela to engage with international companies and the international market, it could have a very damaging effect again on the Venezuelan economy. From what I understand, because I have in-laws there, I don't understand a lot, right? It's just the basics of what they tell me. The situation is stable. There are no longer shortages, but it's one of those things where, you know, instead of shortages, now it's the case where the cost of living is high enough that I guess you could say it's almost like there's a two-tiered society. We forget rich people. We're talking not talking rich people. So it's, do you have a good enough job? Do you have a good enough income to afford to buy things or not? And not everybody is in that first category. There are some people who don't have enough of an income and they're struggling. And it could be working for international companies and having big respectable jobs, but just depending on the situation, you're not earning enough money, and thus you're in trouble. The shelves aren't bare. The shelves have stuff. You just can't afford it right now, depending. So if it gets worse again, we may see more Venezuelans fleeing Venezuela, and yes, there are other countries, but some of them will invariably end up here. So, I mean, right now we're stable. To what extent we could accept more migrants safely, both for ourselves and for themselves, that's a whole other kettle of fish. But we have to wait and see how that turns out. I'm not entirely sure that everything Trump says is his end goal. I believe he's an aggressive negotiator, which could both work for him and work against him. We just have to see if he takes it too far, how bad his aggression and his tactics leaves the situation, because it's against the norm of how international diplomacy works. And while it might be good to shake it up a little bit and not be predictable, the problem is if you're not doing something that they understand, they will respond in ways you might not expect. Meanwhile, just want to point out there was another theft from a place of worship at a penal mosque during Ramadan. And I just mentioned it. I mean, I brought up the Hindu temples desecration and theft to some extent. Theft of items from Christian churches, I believe mainly Roman Catholic, but I could be wrong. And now we have an incident with an Islamic mosque. Here's the thing. As the crime situation goes on, less things will be held sacred. Less things will be considered off limits. The boundaries will start to fade. Psychologically, that means that individuals who would have been relatively safe despite the violence before, because it was contained by whatever principles the criminals stuck to in order not to bring the heat on themselves, well, now it seems as though they have no fear about the heat because the detection rate is that low. So, and it goes all the way maybe to the highest office holders. If this continues, we don't know how bad it could get, and I don't want to find out. I'd rather not. But I don't want to necessarily say anything further, because then I might say that I'm inciting whatever or encouraging whatever, and that's not the point. The point is, we don't know how bad it could get, but we have no reason to feel safe now. We already have seen that the line of old people and children has already been crossed. Deputy Commissioner of Prisons, that line was crossed. They still have some lines that have not been crossed yet, but once they get crossed, you cannot walk back over them and say, my bad, and we'll forget it ever happened. Once that happens, the floodgates will be open. That water would be gone downstream. And whatever damage it does is whatever it does. We have to live with that precedent that will potentially encourage further similar behavior. Last thing, Fire Service Association, they have concerns that the Crown Point Airport fire station is not enough for the new terminal. Here's the thing. Now, I don't know if the government has plans, because when you make a bigger airport, unless you're telling me that the existing fire station has several times more the capacity than was needed for the original airport, in which case, that's a waste, isn't it? I don't know if it was also expected somehow to service the community. I don't think that is allowed. But one would hope that they would have accounted for this, right? I hope so. Maybe they did. I don't know. It's just that the Fire Service Association, they themselves don't know. That's also kind of bad if they don't know, because one would think that their members, I don't know, are the fire officers that actually have to do the job and man the station. So we have to wait and see on that, but I will just find that hilarious and upsetting all at the same time. Let's take a quick break. When we come back, we'll get through a few topics in Daily Review. Before we welcome our guest, stay tuned. This is Talking about WSN. We'll be right back after this.
This is Face of Sports, WESN Content Capital. How you felt about the kiss on the lip?
That's the business. I'm nothing to do with that.
I find that was distasteful.
The national senior team, whether you like it or not, that is the model for all other teams to follow.
I'm assuming that the regional requirement may be a much stricter requirement.
This is not about Pro League and Super League. This is a league run by the Normalization Committee that I'm responsible for.
Nobody expected FIFA to fund this arrangement.
If we don't get a professional attitude towards this, we are doomed for failure.
You break the balance, trip the leg, control the body.
They ain't gonna stand put forever.
Why you want the Chiefs to lose so? Why you want the Chiefs to lose so?
They already have two. Lamar don't
Why?
have.
You're jealous because you know the Chiefs getting closer to the Patriots. Let's go to the last part.
No,
of this game.
no.
Let's go to the last part.
Hi, I'm Claudette, radiographer at the radiology departments at the community hospital. We offer high-quality service with state-of-the-art equipment in X-ray, ultrasound, CT, and mammogram. Come, our friendly staff awaits you.
Give us a call at 235-5479.
The Community Hospital of Seventh-day Adventist,
where good private health care is affordable.
And we're back with today's Daily Review, and unless you were staying away from your television, which probably is something that a lot of people do, at least of certain generational ages, you would not have seen the Prime Minister having a sit-down interview with 3 different reporters from 3 different media houses. They asked him some questions. Some of the questions I found were good, some of the questions were nah. But at the end of the day, I do appreciate the effort by the reporters and the Prime Minister for having this interview. Although, I guess one could argue what benefit would it be to do a public relations situation now with the person that's leaving us. But there were some questions pertinent to the future of the country and the state that he's left it in. Our Prime Minister said that, he leaves Trinidad and Tobago better off. That's an interesting statement to make. Here's the part about it that's interesting. I don't think, and I could be wrong, but I suspect that there isn't really anybody that is capable of determining whether or not that statement is accurate. We just had a pandemic. That level of disruption. How much better off would we be or not if we didn't have the pandemic, if Dr. Rowley wasn't Prime Minister? If, how much, we really don't know. A lot of the things that has happened within the last 5 years have been unprecedented, or unprecedented in the modern age. And I don't mean modern as in postmodernism, but modern as in literally the current now. The Ukraine war, it's not unprecedented to have a war, but it is to some extent unprecedented to have such a war where at least one of the combatants is a nuclear power. It's on their border. So much of the international community is involved, and the effect around the globe by what would have before been just considered a local war, it was relatively severe. But one of the things that the Prime Minister said I find interesting. I don't know if I could find it. But he pointed to the fact that he will have his critics. I'll have to paraphrase here because I don't think I could find it in the whole article. He pointed to the fact that, look, some people might not like my personality, but I am who I am, and I am who you voted for. And I thought that statement summed it up best. If you didn't like Dr. Keith Rowley as Prime Minister, the people that have to take the most responsibility for that are basically the voters. Obviously, most of the people who voted for him still like him, I would imagine. I could be wrong, but I don't think there's that significant level of hate for the man. So those who didn't necessarily like him, because it isn't just weak, he got a second term. Now, I believe the voter numbers weren't particularly high, so there were a lot of voters who just didn't vote, but he had a second term. He was voted back in. You got to see the job performance in the first 5 years. Granted, the second 5 years had unprecedented levels of all kind of bacchanal going on, from COVID into a series of controversies of which we may not get a good resolution for. So to some extent, while we could judge certain aspects of the situation, like the meritless situation, it's difficult to say, okay, what is the final judgment on that, on how we should view Dr. Keith Rowley, on how his legacy should be objectively. Yes, we could do so subjectively based on our opinion of what we think is the case and how we weight it, how we analyze it, what our perspective is. But there are limits to speculation, there are limits to assumption. But regardless, he was voted in. At the end of the day, the results of the 2020 election was Dr. Keith Rowley was voted back to lead the country. And if you don't like that, then maybe you should take the electoral process more seriously. This is why, when it comes down to it, I've reached the point, and I try to encourage people to stop thinking about the politicians as the enemy. Because, first of all, it's not like we do anything to replace them, right? We blame them for all the problems. Then we want them to fix all the problems that we blame them for. We blame them to be incompetent, but we expect them to be brilliant. If the voters approach their responsibility as part of the democratic process better, I do believe that a lot of politicians would have a better job performance by certain metrics. One of them, quite possibly, I can't speak with certainty, but quite possibly would have been Dr. Keith Rowley. One of the good things that I appreciated was when Akash Samru asked him about his health. It's one of the things that I have speculated on, mostly privately, and with people privately, not necessarily sure, although I have mentioned it up maybe a couple of times. And he did, you know, he's a man of a certain age. 2 of his brothers have died. I understand. You know, he's in good health, regardless of what I think about his job performance. I am happy to hear that. But one of the other interesting lines of questioning was with regards to putting all of our eggs in one basket, where Dr. Thrawley claimed that is not the case. Here's my problem with that. Now we get to arguments of semantics and opinion, but as much as Dr. Thrawley tried to say all of our eggs were not in one basket, well, okay, all of our eggs technically went in the dragon basket, fine. But now it's like, how do you define basket? Is it that each individual item like dragon, field, and manatee is a basket? Or are we speaking about the overall energy basket? Now, Dr. Thrawley tried to say, yes, we have expanded into manufacturing and we have a new industrial park. I understand diversification is not going to happen overnight, but we did not necessarily see the agency to give you the perception that diversification was a priority. It didn't have to be the most highest prioritized line item. It could have come second to certain energy situations because Karen and I and others, we acknowledge the fact that, look, in the immediate to short term, we're still going to be dependent on the energy sector. But we didn't really see, it's not agency to get diversification tomorrow. It's agency to start the processes, to start as much processes as feasibly possible in order to get the ball rolling, because we're going to have growing pains, and the sooner and the more urgent, though not recklessly hasty, we act, the faster we could get ourselves in a better position. But it seems as though we're moving at a snail's pace. Now, all of that, I guess, to some extent, is subjective, and it's also potentially unfair because we don't know what the situation is with regards to the resources, with regards to the private sector feedback, right? It's not that simple. But my point is, there are times when leadership is showing that you care, even if you can't do anything about the situation. And with regards to diversification, while politicians may think that they've mentioned it enough, how much more you want us to show us such a kid? Listen, it takes a bit more than that to convince people. It's ironic that politicians in general like to put on the dog and pony puppy show, but they don't necessarily understand the subtle differences of how to show leadership in a similar manner to a puppy show, but something more effective, something more concrete. Utilizing your messaging, utilizing your framing, but in a positive way, not in a negative way, not to cover something up, but to highlight something in order to give maybe like the private sector, who seemingly does not have confidence in the local economy to drive diversification on their own, to give them the confidence, to give the citizens the confidence that, hey, we're serious about this and we're going to get this done. And we're going to get this done, not necessarily we're going to rush it, but we are going to get it done as soon as feasibly possible. I don't think anybody thinks that. And if people don't think that diversification is important and something that we are pushing and striving for, then the private sector, whether it's the labor market or investors, they're not going to buy in. So then what's the point? It's going to move at a snail's pace because, unfortunately, it seems as though the private sector needs the government to hold their hand, right, to hold them up and to lead them as though it's a retired elderly dog that could barely walk, I don't know, or a person in a retirement home that can't see. Moving on to the second topic here. This one kind of, well, it didn't necessarily take me by surprise, but this topic did technically, early in the week, did take me by surprise. Now it's, I wouldn't say it's taken a new twist, but The Newsday, I'm not too sure if they were pointed to this or if they uncovered this by themselves. There's a report from the New York-based Human Rights Foundation. And I think we have the cover page of the report, if you could put it up on the screen. And this report is basically speaking on the topic in a manner of the workers' exploitation, which I'm not entirely sure if this is the basis of the U.S. State Department's declaration with regards to the Cuban healthcare workers being exploited and what they're going to do with regards to certain requirements or certain measures against countries that utilize Cuban healthcare workers. But the report basically, here's the thing, everything that the report says, it tracks with what you hear about communist countries or former communist countries, like maybe North Korea, maybe not so much China anymore, but the point is the level of control they try to exert on their citizens who are allowed to temporarily leave the country, but they're not allowed to actually migrate, right? I don't think China is quite like this anymore, but North Korea is definitely. One of the things is, at least with North Korea, when people go abroad to do foreign, I think they have restaurants and I can't remember if it's hotels, but they would send people to work in businesses owned by North Korea abroad. Those people at times might use that opportunity to defect, that is to say, to not have to go home. The problem is, while I understand that these things tend to be true, I do not know what the sources are of this human rights organization for the report to say that it is true about Cuban healthcare workers. Or, to be more granular, it's true about all Cuban healthcare workers across the board. Because the head of our nursing association, Edie Stewart, he's saying that local nurses never got the impression that Cuban medical workers have been exploited or even trafficked, right? According to him, they want to go home. And to some extent, this is where it gets sticky, right? Are they brainwashed, or do they just genuinely like their country and they like their way of living? We don't necessarily know. Now, I didn't go through this whole report. I didn't have time because I now found it this morning after reading the report from the Newsday. But we have never heard of Cuban healthcare workers in this country having these situations. And again, by all accounts, they socialize. The report says that they're prevented from socializing. They have authorization with regards to who, if they speak to anybody that is bad talks the Cuban government, that's against the rules. And relationships with people, they have to get authorization, all kind of thing. They're controlled. They're not just sent here to be here and then compelled to come back. They're controlled while they're here. They have special passports. They can't use to travel anywhere else. But the flip side to that is some of these things are not necessarily outright malicious. And case in point, locally it seems as though they're not necessarily that controlled. They come, they work, and they go home. They socialize normally. Nobody has picked up on any funny business. Maybe that's being covered up well. I don't know. They're saying that they're forced to go work abroad because the wages at home are too low. Or they might get fired. Well, to some extent, if they have that many healthcare workers, those might be the available jobs. To some extent, maybe it's perception, perspective, semantics. I don't know for sure. It's just that locally, anecdotal evidence kind of suggests that this is not a thing. Now, to sum this up, Kamala Pasabi-Sessa, one of the things she said in an earlier story, from a story earlier in the week, is that she was complaining about the healthcare system, saying we have hundreds of, and went on to say, we have hundreds of local doctors, nurses, medical technicians who are unemployed and hundreds on short-term contracts. We should be putting our people first. Our first priority should be creating jobs for local medical personnel because we spend billions in subventions, gates, and scholarships to educate them. I understand that, but on some level, at least with regards to nurses, I don't know if we have nurses who are not employed, but the situation does not, seemingly, is not working out quite like what the opposition leader has stated. Because the Nursing Association and hospitals are complaining about a nursing shortage, not unemployed nurses. And they're complaining about a brain drain of nurses going to other countries, not nurses who can't find jobs, so they're stuck here. Nurses leave jobs here to leave, and the vacant positions now are a problem to fill, or at least that's the impression that I have. With regards to doctors, well, our own medical education system is limited by the specialties provided, and if Cuba has those specialists, it is what it is. So I don't know if it's that simple and that straightforward, and I would have thought that at least on this topic, given the opposition leader's experience as Prime Minister, she and his staff would have been better read into the details of how the healthcare system works to not give an oversimplified statement like this without proper qualifiers to bridge the gap between what she's saying and some of the realities that the Nursing Association, amongst others, have been complaining about. I don't think our healthcare system can function with the whole of removing the Cuban healthcare workers, particularly nurses. So, now granted, to what extent they are unfairly compelled to be here, let's be real, democratic capital countries have their own levers and means to unfairly compel people to behave a certain way. It's just that it looks different in a communist country. That's all. But we know that there's unfair treatment in capitalist societies too. That's why some people think, communism would be better than capitalism. They all have the same feeling, the human element. But this situation, Prime Minister had to say what he had to say, the government had to say what it had to say, the opposition leader, to what extent is she opposing something for opposing sake? Meanwhile, what is the truth of the matter? I don't know if we would know, because it seems as though maybe it's worse in other countries, but we don't have a good indication here. So this is one of those things where, again, I don't think it's a good idea for us to speculate about it. Maybe it'll put a spotlight on the local healthcare practitioners, and then somebody will interview them, and then the Cuban government may or may not like that, pull a plug of the whole thing, and we may have further issues getting healthcare workers. And therein lies the ethical dilemma. How bad is it really to justify us risking the workforce? Maybe it is bad enough that speaking out on it is justifiable. Maybe it's not. Maybe a lot of it is red herrings and assumption, and we'll make a problem that isn't a problem. I have no idea what that is. But this is one of the areas where ethical journalism now becomes very, 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 very serious on the matter. What is truth? And how do we find out the truth without causing unintended consequences? The pursuit of truth in and of itself, it's not easy. But then again, that's why we should hope that some of our best and brightest enter into the journalism field. But again, I fear far too often, too much of our best and brightest, they go abroad because local media ain't a high-paying profession. But I guess those who do work in it, to some extent at least, they do have the vocation and calling to try to get the job done. Kudos to some of those guys last night. Let's take a break. When we come back, we'll welcome our guests. Stay tuned.
I am Dr. Delphina Ovid, your friendly neighborhood dentist. At Community Hospital Dental Clinic, we offer examinations which include x-rays, basic oral cancer screening, and a treatment plan. We also offer cleanings, fillings, extractions, root canal treatment, and complete and partial dentures. Remember, you don't have to brush and floss all your teeth, just the ones you want to keep.
Give us a call at 235-5479.
The Community Hospital of Seventh-day Adventist,
where good private health care is affordable.
Money is something we all deal with, but how many of us truly understand it? What if you could make better decisions with your money? Decisions that secure your future, protect your family, and bring you peace of mind. I'm Darren Jacobs, and I'm here to help you make sense of your dollars. Welcome to Dollars and Cents, the show that breaks down the financial world in ways that matter to you. No jargon, no confusion, just real conversations about money, your money. So join me every Wednesday at 10 a.m. on WESN for Dollars and Cents.
FanZone, your reliable, authentic supplier, has just gotten better. You can now visit our website www.fanzonett.com for your authentic wear and collectibles. The only place where you can use both your Visa debit and credit cards. Visit our website fanzonett.com to make your purchase today.
Every word, every line, every paragraph depicts a real moment in someone's life. A father, a sister, a mother, a brother. We at Newsday are dedicated to you, the people, and through independent, unwavering journalism, strive to always bring your stories to life. Because your stories are more than just words. Newsday, independent and credible.
Welcome back to Talking About, ladies and gentlemen. Sean Michael Small, joined by our usual contributor on Fridays, disaster management expert and a former member of the national security apparatus. Of course, we have retired Inspector Ashraf Ali. Good morning. Welcome back.
Good morning, sir. It's nice to be here again.
And I had it on my programs or on my rundowns, but I never got to it. And then this morning, I think given that you wanted to speak about it, I'm like, all right, let's just save it for when you come on air, because the situation in Sea Lots with the illegal cameras and also the illegal electricity, I think it highlights potentially a complex situation in the crime-fighting law enforcement apparatus, both the social dimension from the illegal connections, but then I don't even think I know all of the implications of the illegal cameras.
So let's put it, so it has a legal component of it. We know the social issues in the Sea Lots area and low-income areas like that. But what about the hazards associated with where you're tapping into electricity lines with not the appropriate devices, the appropriate voltage that you have, and
training
and the number of items in your home that you are putting on one system that can overload the system, you could end up with fires. And
I got the impression that it might have been something like jumper cables that they were using.
They call them alligator clips. They clamp on the line. And,
right, but still.
And it is dangerous. It's a risk you're taking, and it can pose some serious challenges in the event of a fire.
Now, do you know of reports? Because I think I don't think it's been highlighted in the media. That doesn't mean that it hasn't happened. But have you heard of reports where people have been injured, or I assume if it ever got to that point, killed because they tried to hook up to an illegal connection?
I never got, I can't say that there was any reports that I am aware of, but I can't say that it didn't happen because those things, nobody's coming and say, well, I was trying to thief electricity.
I mean, I know, but usually,
not that I know of.
I unfortunately saw a video of a man on a float or a truck, and he tried to move a power cable with his hands.
That happened already.
Right?
Yeah.
So I don't know if that was local. I think that was a foreign video. But my point is, like, the level of injuries that I'm afraid of, you know, I don't think it's something where you sleep it off and you just tell nobody in the morning. It's, you know, you don't come back from that. Yeah. And it's very apparent something happened. Either you got doused with gasoline or, right? So, but I mean, I guess this is one of those things where, and it goes back to what we talked about, security and risk assessment. It's not a matter of if, but when, if this is allowed to continue.
Exactly. And over the years, we have had situations in those areas where service providers would have requested the assistance of law enforcement to go in and deal with the situation, specifically electrical supplies. It has been done over time. And then as soon as they leave, a couple of days, 2 days, or 3 days afterwards, they continue doing it again. It's something that that needs to be addressed. But in the last situation where we had this little situation taking place in the Sealots with the conflicts among the residents, you know, one side to the other, and the groups, all of that, and the camera system. Now, let's be real. There's a lot of areas in Trinidad and Tobago that have communities that have cameras. Cameras are not hard to do thing. Cameras are used for various purposes. One, they may use to as a means of security to secure their premises of unwanted individuals coming in. In those areas where they know that they have rival gang members, rivalry, it's an opportunity for them to see who is not supposed to be in the area for protection of themselves, right? As well as when law enforcement enters the area, for them to put a house in order because law enforcement will be coming in the area.
Now, one of the things is that they said they were on light posts and things like that. So if they're on utility posts, that would obviously be illegal.
Yes, because you need to get permission from the utilities to place any additional device or anything to utilize those poles.
But they also said that some were on trees. Now, to what extent, like, how is that illegal? Or maybe...
The issue, that is not illegal.
But if it's part of an illegal network that includes illegal cameras, it could be, I guess, roped in?
Let's put it this way. In my view, it is not illegal to put CCTV cameras in your area.
Right.
It is illegal to utilize the state the state utilities apparatus to implement it.
Right.
You can put it on a tree, you could put it on your house, you could put it on your next door neighbor house, you could plant a pole or your own personal pole, private pole, and put it up. The issue is not the cameras, because if the issues were cameras, then we would not have cameras in all these other communities.
Right.
The issue is that the uses of the camera, whether the cameras are used for the purpose of what it intended. One, when a community puts a camera, is to ensure that when any criminal activity takes place, they can have some recording of it so they can assist the police. In these communities, they may use it counterproductive or as a counterintelligence for the law enforcement. So as soon as law enforcement enters, they see who it is.
Yeah. One of the things, as I said, several of the cameras were pointed at the sea. Is it that law enforcement agencies use approaches from the sea, or is it that there's criminal activity coming from the sea in that area?
That area, remember when you are in area of that nature, or in an organization of that, where you have rivalry with other organizations, there's always the risk of somebody trying to attack. They are using that for that means also. This is not only for law enforcement, they are using it for their own personal protection in their community.
Right.
Right. So we had to look at it from that perspective, not only looking at it from when law enforcement is coming in, but they are trying to protect themselves at the same time. Right? Whether they are criminal elements, because not everyone in those communities are not law-abiding citizens. There are a number of law-abiding citizens living in those communities. It also serves to protect them.
So here, I guess this is one of the areas where you could say maybe it starts to develop a new realm of unethical, because there were concerns coming out of Carnival about law enforcement coming back into C-lots to deal with certain situations. So the woman was saying, hey, the violence getting out of hand. The men were saying, hey, this is just blown out of proportion because men were fighting over a CPEP contract. Meanwhile, recently, I think this week, that was last week, this week there was one family in C-Lot saying that they were still being victimized by the police, which is something that you hear from hotspot communities, not the entire community, but various people in the community. So you have this push and pull now where, I mean, we haven't even gotten to the illegal electricity on this angle yet, but to some extent, I would hazard, I guess, it's not like they're forthcoming with the CCTV footage to hand it over to the police when they want help to secure their neighborhood, right?
Exactly. So when you look at it, so this is where the intelligence and all the investigation would lead to. What was the intention of? Was it a positive intention in terms of protecting the community from other criminal elements? Or is it for the purpose of, when law enforcement comes in, to have a heads up so they can continue they can hide their nefarious activities and their criminal activities? It might work both ways.
Because it seems as though maybe the disconnection of the illegal electricity connections, maybe some of the members of the community realize if we call the police in here to deal with this, they will also discover that. We don't want to be disconnected. We don't want people to discover that some of us have illegal connections, right? And when you read some of these stories on how, look, we don't have electricity, we need it. And to some extent, some might say it's a sense of entitlement. To some extent, but regardless, an illegal connection doesn't solve any problem in the long term. It's just patching it, right?
Yes.
And at the end of the day, one of the reasons why I'm saying it's patching it is, if for the sake of that you're saying, well, I don't really want the police in here, but then you're going to complain that the area is lawless and the authorities aren't paying attention to you.
So
it's a vicious cycle that feeds itself.
That is where we continue to say, and I have been saying it over, you create an environment and a culture within your community. When you create these type of cultures in your community, at some point in time, it becomes acceptable behavior, and take that and extrapolate it throughout Trinidad and Tobago. There are many communities in Trinidad and Tobago that creates a particular environment, a particular culture. Once it comes out of that community and it starts to emanate throughout Trinidad and Tobago, this is where we see, and we have issues and we have challenges where crime is now crime is as where it is, and the type of behavior and the attitudes are taking place. So it is not only about the community itself, it's us. It's how we behave and what type of acceptable behavior that you have in your community. This deals with also, it also comes out of the situation of when you're treating with incidents, understanding and assessing what type of community that you have, how you're going to treat with particular communities. The approach for different communities will be different. You use different approaches because there are acceptable behaviors in different communities.
But at the end of the day, it's not as though this pattern of behavior and some of these different examples of behavior, it's unique to Sealot. It's not like there's some special case.
No?
No. There are, I mean, just around Port of Spain alone, there are multiple areas that will have similar challenges to this, and where things like this will go on, where on some level, the citizens, they will be de-incentivized because of whatever activities they're up to. And it's not all hard crimes. It's not all cocaine and guns. It's illegal water and electricity connections or things like that, right? Where now they're kind of doing math. Do we want the police involved? But then the problem is you end up in situations where, well, you want to be independent, but when you're independent, when you are quote unquote off the grid, although ironically you're illegally tapping into the grid, you run the risk of being not literally on the frontier, but you're like a frontier town where it's lawless and where bad things could happen to you.
And so the community has to take some blame and accept responsibility for how they...
Especially if they want to solve it, right?
Yes. That is always, so that is one of the reasons, that is how you can deal with systems. Once you accept that a system has a fault, you now have an opportunity to look at a way to deal with it.
Because in my mind, for the state to solve it unilaterally, it's going to have to be a heavy-handed approach. You're probably going to have to, I don't know, break down the community in ways that the people are not going to accept.
And that is not always the best approach, or I should say,
I mean, is it ever the best approach?
Sometimes that approach in the first instance may not be the best because you create more conflict than you really want to, and there's no opportunity to go to de-escalate it anymore, right? Because you're already starting to escalate, and when you're starting to deal with conflicts from a confrontational perspective, and you're already on the escalation scale, or always keep on escalating it, it is difficult to bring it back down to acceptability.
Is this something that you see generally with human nature? Because I don't think this is limited to people in these type of communities where you're not always aware of what's best for you. Now, the reason why the authorities at times will be better aware is if for no other reason, just share experience. A lot of people that work, whether it's the police or social workers or whatever, you've seen this thing played out how many times before. You see where the outcomes goes. It's not that you're wiser, you're smarter, you know better because you're superior. You just know better because you've seen it. You've seen the bad outcomes, right? And not everybody, because they haven't dealt with the bad outcomes, they're still alive, right? And to make that mistake. And because that's probably one of the reasons, the psychology of it, why the authorities can't just go in there and dictate, this is how we're going to solve it and you all need to stop this. But that's something that a lot of people, you know, when the police stop you in a roadblock, or if you're speeding in traffic or what have you, just normal interactions where we don't always know what's best for us and we want to push back against the authorities and feel like we know better. I mean, when the people wrap around a light pole, you know, I wish we could ask them, did you know better in that moment that you should be speeding?
And so you're going on the conversation that we had sometime, if I can remember, and I was explaining that whether or not we in Trinidad and Tobago are actually doing policing.
Right.
Whether we're actually doing policing. Because when situations present itself in communities of these type of communities that already have some conflicts and already been targeted and considered to be hotspot areas, how do we police? Are we policing from the perspective of understanding that we are part and parcel of the community and we want to build the community, or we are going into the community to force the community to adhere to what the status quo is? Once you try to go into adhere and enforce, you will have confrontation. And many of our challenges that we have in Trinidad when it comes to policing is confrontation. You see the confrontation coming forward because even in this situation, one side of the community or a group of the persons in the community said that they don't like what is taking place. And if you listen to what they don't like is that they should not be victimized within their own community.
Right.
Good? So that's true. They should be treated in that manner. But I'm saying this to say that what is the acceptable behavior within that community? Who has created that environment and that acceptable social behavior within that entire community?
Well, one of the things, and we know this from places like Chicago, which is why I find high-rises to be very dubious in Chicago. Those big high-rises, which they have internal staircases, and it's almost like a castle, right? I don't know if it's currently the case, but at least at one point in time, they became like many criminal dens or castles by which, you know, they could look out for the police from the high ground, see them come in, however far away, right? You just control the bottom floor, all of a sudden you control what goes in and out, and you have essentially whoever's living there, to some extent, they're almost like hostages in their own home, right? And then they could conduct their drug operations, whether it's sales, distribution. I'm not too sure if they would, but I assume they probably did at some point also. Maybe whatever chemistry they had to do, they might do it there too, because it's all a self-contained, self-protected thing. They keep as much as possible law enforcement out in situations like that because they don't want to be discovered. So you're saying who sets it up? I do wonder if to some extent, because like it starts subtly, but the criminal enterprise slowly but surely encourages, takes over,
right.
keeps law enforcement out, encourages the people to keep law enforcement out.
And that is what I'm saying. That committee didn't start, or didn't pop up just so. You had generations that, over the generations in there, elders, children growing up, children having children, and so we're going. When I'm saying who created the environment, I'm saying the persons who are there, they created an acceptable social environment where they're accepting certain things taking place.
Yeah.
Once you accept that, so let's bring it in your household. If you accept in your household that you are accepting that when your child uses obscene language is the normal, is normal.
Yeah.
At what point in time are you going to say, hey, that's good enough? If you speak in the language and your child starts to use the language, when that child uses the language fluently now, on a regular basis, and you say, listen, hey, you can't be talking to me in that manner now because I am the adult. But that is the environment that you're creating.
Right. It's a case of like, it's only when it's too late, all of a sudden it's a problem.
Right. So in this situation, it's not too late. So we're glad that some persons are crying out for assistance and saying that we don't want to tolerate this type of behavior.
Is it not too late? Because it seems as though part of the community, the idea that we don't want the police around here is embedded enough.
But so what the challenge that you have and challenge that law enforcement is going to face now is how we're going to balance. Because too much regularization or enforcement or presence and how you treat with the presence, how the persons view the presence. On one side, they don't want our presence. On the other side, if you speak to someone or you speak to certain areas or you speak to one side, if you speak to one side more or you try to police one side, one group more, it appears to be what? Victimization on one side.
Favoritism.
Favoritism, victimization, corruption.
You're for them, you're against us.
Right. So you were going to get that narrative coming out in any event. And that is where I'm saying that in order for us to get back to some level of stability in some of these communities, we need to change the way that we do policing.
Because I think obviously it's going to be a lot harder psychologically and practically for police to do their job in a community that doesn't want them to be there, or at least outwardly, right? We don't know, obviously there are probably people privately who are well-meaning citizens who don't necessarily want to run the police and deny, but they can't necessarily outwardly talk to the police, you know, because
there are other conflicts that would arise.
So to what extent these communities, they feel ignored, I would imagine, in some capacity. How justifiable is that? Because when you look at the country, and I guess this is not unique to Trinidad and Tobago, but I always find it very psychologically, maybe is this weird? Like, it's hard to describe, but the dichotomy of when you look at certain areas of the country, and then when you look at other areas like Sealots, like the Beetham, right? I mean, Beetham has one of the most direct examples of feeling ignored. We have an open sewage leak for months or years or whatever. It was some ridiculous amount of time, right? One would think that would be an easy, relatively easy fix, but for whatever reason, it was not. These communities, they feel ignored. To some extent, are the authorities seemingly ignoring them?
You see, we keep using the narrative of saying that these are hotspot areas, and these areas are always full of criminal elements. But when you look at the number of persons that go recorded, unaware, unknown of, that comes out of these communities that have been successful in their own way.
Right, when you say unknown, it's not like known to the police. These are people who are not known to the police.
Public, to the general public, because nobody mentions some of the successes that has come out of the
I see
areas.
what you mean. Yeah.
So we always classify those communities as...
We only get the bad news.
We get, the negatives about them. But there are positives. There are a number of persons, and I'm saying there are a number of persons who lives in them communities, are employed within the government institutions and other private institutions who does not want to say where they live because of stigmatization.
Yeah.
But they are doing jobs, right? That any one of us in Trinidad doing job just like a normal citizen of Trinidad and Tobago, and doing a good job of it, but just that because where they live, they don't want to tell anybody of their particular address because people stigmatize where they live. No, I am simply saying is this. Yes, the way the community may have been established a number of years ago, it may not be, it may have small elements and small pockets who causing problems in these areas. But when you stigmatize the entire community and you don't have any proper knowledge of what is taking place in the communities from the perspective of understanding what is taking place, we're not really understanding what is happening in these communities, you know. We're really not understanding, you know.
I would just like to go, I know that it might be difficult to police a community that seemingly doesn't want to be policed, right? Because that's kind of, I don't know what else that some elements would want to remain hidden and thus will encourage that. But could potentially one of the strategies to come to a solution, to be part of the solution, I know that I don't like the concept of just having a massive police presence. I don't think it's sustainable, right? We literally don't have enough police officers to go to every street corner. But when you're saying, hey, we have this community that has these specific problems and it has a geographical limit, right? We're not talking about all of Port of Spain, right? Then perhaps could we just flood the zone with police patrols, have a visible presence? Not that it's going to solve everything, but it could start.
So this is my opinion from my experience and my training in dealing with certain, from a strategic perspective. The mere fact that the persons in a community came to law enforcement for assistance, it's an olive branch that has been extended to you. It's an opportunity for you to get in to a community that never wanted you there. The mere fact that they came, how they came, I put that in my back pocket because I'm seeing an opportunity to get in to a community and make myself my presence felt. I would have, if dealing with it from my perspective and from my time, I would have utilized the resources that is presently available to us, the SOE, where they in the SOE have the authority to put an area in the curfew, put a curfew in it. I've been asked to come and assist and this is my measures. I am locking down the entire area. I'm searching the entire area, both sides of the table, all houses, all the homes and everything like that, full presence, because my first objective is to eradicate the area of all illegal arms, firearms, because if I'm sending law enforcement there, I'm want to ensure that they're safe, that the environment is relatively safe for us to be present there on a regular basis, because you don't want confrontation with firearms. So you clear the area. You go in there, you saturate the area, you search all the houses, because you don't have under the SOU, you don't need warrants to search everybody's house. You search everybody's house. And you engage the community after that by leaving a presence in the area over a period of time. But the fact that you didn't take that window of opportunity early, when you reach the confrontation and you go in from a level of confrontation, it means that it appears that you're taking one side as opposed to the other side. And that is where the conflict will continue, because right now when law enforcement is in there, they are seeing the law enforcement as what? One side happy to see them, the other side say no. But at some point in time, the side that is happy to see you, if you confront those persons associated with those individuals who are also contributing to the conflict, is it now that you're saying that I'm targeting the ones that we're bringing here? So you put yourself in at a disadvantageous position when you had an opportunity to be in an advantageous position.
And I guess part of it, with these situations, the police probably can't solve the entire thing on their own, because I think it goes back to what you see with certain gangsters historically. They do a good job providing for the community that feels neglected by the authorities. So it further incentivizes that behavior. I mean, think about it. This is why, to some extent, some of these big criminal gang bosses, I don't necessarily know if it's widespread here, but in the States, they would always have, give away food for Thanksgiving and for Christmas and all of these things. And when you need help, we'll help you out and whatever. And I am good for you, so nobody wants to speak out against me.
One hand don't shake, as they say.
And to some extent, this is basically the same thing with the illegal connections. And now when you're dependent on the criminal money, it's like the granny who don't question where the fridge come from. I think it was you who had this conversation. You know your son don't have a 9-to-5 job, but he have money to give you appliances to fix up your house.
And you're not complaining about that.
Right? So to some extent, it's more than just policing, but at the same time, perhaps it might need, and this is the thing, it's not like you're advocating, tactical teams with full gear going in and kicking down doors and ransacking houses. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about patrol officers on the ground, engaging with the community, searching everything, yes, but to some extent showing a presence, building relations, opening up channels of communication.
You must have constant presence. Constant presence is important, and
that helps with trust, right?
It helps in trust in every aspect of it. Is how you bring it across. Now, all communities in Trinidad and Tobago, we need presence of that nature, but is it sustainable? We just had Carnival. Carnival was relatively safe, notwithstanding how certain things that was happening, right? But why persons felt safe? Because of the first things, the SOE, and then the presence of, and the expected presence of law enforcement personnel, and the acceptance of knowing that there would have law enforcement in and around, because persons want law enforcement close by for them to feel safe. If you want something, you will accept it. But if you don't want it, you will reject it and oppose and have conflict with the presence. So this is the situation that we have here. On one side you want, on the other side, but you may want your presence, but you're dictating how that presence is supposed to be and to what extent your presence is supposed to be. It's not a simple fix.
Yeah, and a lot of it will be a combination of short-term and long-term solutions. That's the thing. I think too many people want to say this will fix it or that will fix it, whereas I do believe I've seen examples that have shown that you can't replace crime fighting with soft measures, right? But at the same time, I don't think you could solve all of crime with hard criminal justice systems, there will always be situations that fill in the cracks, and perhaps things like C-Lots, the BTHM and other communities like that, Enterprise, the criminals know. I mean, they have means and methods, right? To what extent do they figure it out on their own? One of the complaints is, why are this cross-section of society using their intelligence and cunning for the wrong things, right? But they figure it out.
Yeah.
And part of it is, if we incentivize the community to not engage with the authorities, we have a bastion by which we could safely operate from. This is, I guess, at this point now, it's almost like a stereotype, a cliche. It's a tale as old as time. We subvert an entire community to our own ends, and it's the insidious part of it is they don't necessarily fully understand how the infiltration occurs, subtly over time until now it reaches a point where now it seems too hard to deal with, right? And it's embedded now, even in the framework of the norms of the community itself. For what it's worth, we'll open the phone lines, but we'll continue the discussion. So, yeah, I guess it goes back down to the wider situation of crime fighting. But one of the things that I'm thinking about is, and I guess this goes back to when you say, when you deal with one thing alone, they might feel victimized or not. But given how big the problem is, I don't think it's feasible to try to say we'll solve all the hotspots at once.
You can't, because each one of, and that is what I'm saying, each one of the communities might be unique in certain aspects.
But so what if we start with one of them? That way we could ensure that we have enough resources to deal with whatever we deal with, because we're not trying to deal with all of them at the same time. We start with one of them, they're under a microscope, but it runs the risk of that community saying you're victimizing us.
And this is the challenge you're going to face, because how we approach certain things and how we approach it is that we approach it from a reactive perspective, not a proactive perspective. Let's be real. This situation has not only popped up. Illegal electricity has not only started. Those communities have been, some persons in those communities have been stealing electricity for a number of years.
Also the camera situation, we've seen it in, I think in Tunapuna it was?
And yes,
yeah.
Tunapuna.
We have Sam Fernando on the line. Good morning, caller, on here.
Morning, Sean.
Morning.
Two things quickly, Sean. One was you discussed on the Cuban medical worker situation.
Yeah.
Let me just say this. I had some Cuban friends within that community. A while ago, in Dr. Rowley's second term as Prime Minister, what they started to do was reduce the amount of contracts that they were giving Cuban doctors on. But they were just part of it, but the majority of doctors were them. And nurses, and started to replace them, and the contracts were up, started to fill the jobs with local medical staff. So we have a lot of medical students going away and coming back with the degrees and with the doctors, and then we have nurses. So they started to reduce them. My friends, one of them, he and his wife, they went. Well, she was actually a nurse. They went to England.
Right.
Got a job in England. And my friend, who was the doctor, actually was my doctor for several years. He went to the U.S. He's now a doctor in Michigan, working in Michigan. So this issue, what surprised me with all the comments that I've heard from all the political commentators who commented on this thing, I heard no one say to the U.S. administration, it's time you all stop that embargo against Cuba. I heard nobody say that, and that is the genesis of all the problems. If they would, since 1959, if they would ease their ridiculous sanctions on Cuba, things in Cuba would be a lot better. A lot better. Secondly, this is for you, Mr. Ali. I came across a video last week. When I saw it, it was posted 2 days prior on YouTube of a police stop of two police officers in a vehicle pulled aside a gentleman. And the gentleman started filming when he was actually in the vehicle. They were in a pickup, so they were higher than him. He was in a Mercedes-Benz. And they pulled him over. Well, they stopped alongside him and started to question him. He started to film, and then they pulled him over on the shoulder behind. And I was appalled by that interaction. And let me tell you why. The gentleman was only asking the police why they pulled him over. What is the reason that they pulled him over? If they have, you know, when a lot of them watching US TV.
Yeah, yeah.
So he's talking about what is the probable cause for you? Why you pulled me over? And he did not have his driver's permit. He gave them the insurance. He did not have his permit. So the officer said to him, do you know your driver's permit number? And he called out his number. He said he left it at home. And the officer got on the phone, and I don't know if he verified wherever he called and they verified. And they wanted to search the vehicle, and the gentleman had refused, and there was a back and forth. And what surprised me is that these two officers did not tell that gentleman, we don't have to have probable cause to search your vehicle. This is a state of emergency in Trinidad and Tobago, and we can stop you at will and search your vehicle.
The officer did say that.
I didn't see that.
Yeah. He said that. He said that.
But he didn't do the search.
He didn't do the search. He didn't search the trunk because he wanted to open the trunk. And I am saying, what I didn't like is when the officer said, 99 days for put down. You remember that comment?
Yes, I agree with you. That was unprofessional.
Generally, what's the comment? Not word for word, but
99 days for you all and 1 day for police.
1 day for the police, yes. What bothered me in the whole thing is, the officer tried to. I don't know if he was intimidated by the person because of the vehicle. Now, I saw, based on the one who was filming, I saw enough evidence there, just from his own filming of his own person, that I didn't see his face. But as a police, if I saw what I saw in terms of his jewelry, I would pull him over myself.
If the officer did well, he started off well. He told when he pulled him on, or when he pulled the driver over, the driver didn't have his seatbelt, so that was the reason for pulling him over. Everything was going good the way the officer was doing. He was doing what he was supposed to do until he started to talk about
whatever that last line.
That last line was, and I agree.
But what worried me about the situation is they had enough infractions there to give him a ticket.
No, let's put it this way. A lot of persons do not know that
he had no seatbelt. He had no driver's permit.
No, forget the driver's permit. This is something that persons don't. Drivers in the road don't know. Under the Motor Vehicle and Road Traffic Act, when you police officer stop you for a breach of the act, they can ask for your name and address. I didn't ask you for your driver's permit.
Yes.
And if I ask you for your name and address, and you refuse to give your name and address, I have the power to arrest you, convey you to the nearest police station, and for you to verify your name and address. I have the power of arrest. So in that situation, I was not having any confrontation with the gentleman. That driver, he would have been at the station. His driver's permit would have to be produced at the station, and all the necessary documentation and the entries would have been made in the diary. He would have been arrested.
His car would have been wrecked, I assume, if he did that?
Exactly.
Because I saw the officer trying to his best to assist this gentleman, and the attitude. Sometimes when you have attitude like that from citizens, you just have to let them feel the brunt of the law.
You don't waste time. You do what you're
you
supposed
have
to
to let
do.
them feel the brunt of the law. So he has left there felt entitled, even more entitled.
Exactly. So
he left that situation even more entitled.
He did not get a ticket for the seatbelt. He was not ticketed for not having his driver's permit in his possession while he's driving a vehicle. Right? Because you're supposed to have your driver's permit when you're driving a vehicle. You could be ticketed for that also.
Yeah, I'm like, how do you know your driver's permit number offhand?
Right.
It's almost like if you regularly don't have it with you.
No, you're supposed to know.
No, Sean.
So I know mine offhand.
I know mine offhand.
I'm sorry.
Sean?
I guess
You know mine offhand.
my bad.
So
we live in an age where most people don't know their phone number offhand, right? I'm just
it should be used as a training tool for officers, because I found that they were the officer tried to be too nice, and I think that is what frustrated him, because he facilitated that gentleman. He knew he did facilitate him, and because of this gentleman's attitude for the entire video, he just lashed out in the end.
The drivers comments on the first two occasions when he asked the officer asked him why he didn't have on his seatbelt. He said, "Well, I didn't have on my seatbelt. I just drink a coconut. I now come and drink a coconut water." When he asked him, "So where's your driver's permit?" "At home."
Right.
So you're adamantly admitting that you're breaching the law.
This is the best part with trainees. Why you don't have on your seatbelt? "Well, I just drink a coconut water." What does that have to do with wearing a seatbelt or not?
But it was a very large coconut, Sean. I mean, it couldn't fit.
Have
a good day, gentlemen.
Thank you,
Thank you very much.
I do have a comment on the last thing you said, Kola. I do feel as though this is part of the consequences of not having a society that is based on principles, on moral values, right? In the sense of what happens now. Well, because politics has infiltrated to the extent that it has, and who know who, and who friends with who, and who too rich to do. And that happens around the world, I get it, but I feel as though we've allowed that vulnerability to go on for too long and to go too far. I wouldn't be surprised if they have some officers, it doesn't have to be a gangster.
And
if it's somebody that has the right name and is dressed in an expensive suit and driving an expensive car, I'm sure there's some officers who's like, I don't know if I want to go through this trouble.
And the sad thing about it, a lot of drivers would not realize that let's say, for discussion purposes, that an accident did occur with that said driver who didn't have his driving documents on him. And when time to go to the insurance, and you didn't produce your driver's permit, you didn't produce your your driver's permit when the other driver requested. There's a level of confrontation going to take place here.
Yeah.
Right? And it can escalate into something different, because if you tell another driver, "Well, I don't have my driver's permit, I'm at home," then so what you driving on, what you on the road?
But I thought also, what about an emergency? Now, let's say it's a bad accident, you're incapacitated, you're unconscious, we don't know who you are, we don't, how easily can we find the next of kin? Who's going to authorize life-saving surgery? I mean, I guess emergency could go ahead and do it, but then we don't know who you are. We can't trace you back. What if we need to do so for whatever reason?
And I think the message that is coming out from this video is from they're viewing it from a different perspective, as the police is being too difficult. The police is only stopping people, law-abiding citizens. But let's put it this way: if persons really listen to the video, the post, from the perspective of being open-minded, you realize that the driver was arrogant.
Yeah.
The driver was actually arrogant. The officer just asked you why you didn't have your seatbelt. All you could say, "Officer, I just passed there. Sorry, I didn't have a seatbelt." And actually go and put on your seatbelt because the officer identified that you didn't have it on.
This was before they got out of the car.
Yes. So he didn't make
an attempt
to put on
because
the driver's his seatbelt.
I'm not saying Mercedes-Benz and gold chains equal criminal. What I am saying is it equals a certain amount of wealth, obviously. And with wealth, regardless of where, it could be totally legitimate, right? If he might like his gold chains, he's a legitimate businessman. The point is it also comes with entitlement.
And this is and because you drive in a particular vehicle, all right, a brand of a vehicle, you should not have been stopped on the road. Come on.
The thing is, and this plays out, I am sure, yes, there are public servants who victimize the public. There are also public servants who get victimizers.
Exactly.
Right? And one plays into the other. And this is the kind of thing where, like, we are adding to the problem if this is allowed, because the officer, to some extent, is too nice, right? Listen, because the pushback on that is when the officers get fed up and now they start to victimize the public back because they're tired with nonsense. If you worked in customer service, you'll understand what I mean, right? It's very hard to be professional when the other side is acting in a very unreasonable manner. But we are out of time, so we'll have to end that there. Maybe we could pick up the conversation where we left off, because I do think a pilot program to deal with hotspot communities, regardless of if they feel victimized or not, might be the best way forward. We don't have the resources to just do a blanket, widespread, solve it all at one time. And
I agree.
To some extent, you could learn lessons from one that could help make it better to the next.
Improve the systems on
all
your
right.
own.
Thanks, Mr. Sanfan, for calling in and commenting on that video. An interesting interaction, to say the least. Folks, this is not America. And even if you see a video in America, the various states and cities have different laws. So please don't try and follow their laws. Thanks to Ashraf for coming here as well and having a conversation with me.
That's not a problem. It's always a pleasure to be here.
Yep. Your retirement seems good for you. Right, keep it up. Hopefully that court matter keeps you retired. Right, folks, make this weekend a good one, as Mr. Shah would say. Remember your allegiance to the Republic and to each other. Stay safe out there. And even when you're interacting with the police, they're human too. It will always be better, regardless of what you think of them, to be nice to them, because it's nice to be nice. We will see you next week. Bye-bye.
WESN.
My name is Dr. Stephen Carroll, the CEO at Community Hospital of Seventh-day Adventist, and we are committed to making good private health care affordable.
For all your medical needs, including dental, radiology, laparoscopy, behavioral and mental health, along with many other services, contact us for more information at 235-5479.
Community Hospital of Seventh-day Adventist,
where good private health care is affordable.
SM Group International Limited, your solutions partner for the latest innovations, brands, and competent staff to meet your needs. We provide products and services in the following divisions: executive services,